Kieran? Super. Okay, welcome all. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Energy Cork Cluster, I'd like to welcome you all to this lunchtime briefing, our 7th and final briefing of 2021. Thanks for joining us for this and for the other lunchtime briefings throughout the year on support for sustainability in business, Green for Micro, the EU Green Deal, the Electricity Transmission Network, Eco-Merit, floating offshore wind and geo-energy storage. We're delighted to welcome EI-H2 to this event today. It's a company that may be new to some of you, but has certainly been making an impact on the Irish energy landscape in the past 12 months and has led a re-evaluation and renewed interest in green hydrogen in an Irish context. As our speakers, Tom and John, today will explain, EI-H2 is an Irish company that is playing a lead role in the development of Ireland's green hydrogen production and distribution capabilities. EI-H2 is becoming a key enabler of Ireland's transition to a clean, independent energy future. As Ireland's first green hydrogen company, EI-H2 are working hard to kickstart and grow Ireland's hydrogen economy. EI-H2's highly experienced industry-leading team are collaborating with technology and energy partners to move quickly and decisively towards helping Ireland achieve its climate action targets. We're very pleased to be hearing from Tom Lynch, CEO, and John Manning, Projects Director of EI-H2. We'll aim to finish in time at 1:45 and hopefully have time for Q&A at the end. The chat function is there for your questions, so pop your questions into the chat at any stage during the presentations, and we'll get to them during the Q&A. Importantly, Energy Cork hosted events would not be possible without the ongoing support of Cork County Council, Cork and Cork City Council through the respective economic development funds. A couple of items of housekeeping. It should be already done so by default, but please keep your microphone on mute for the duration of the event. As I mentioned, we'll have a short Q&A session following the presentations. Please use the chat function to ask any questions you might have. This event is being recorded and will be shared online afterwards. And so I'll introduce Tom Lynch, CEO of EI-H2. Tom Lynch founded Energy Services, a Cork-based power and energy consultancy in the 90s, and has an extensive track record in leading and developing renewable energy and associated infrastructure projects in many parts of the world. He has spent the last 15 years advising utilities and the banking sector on mega projects in Central and Southeast Asia and the Middle East. During the last 7 years as chief advisor to DEWA, Dubai government, he helped deliver the world's largest solar PV installation, in addition to advising the team for the first green hydrogen electrolysis plant in MENA, which went operational in 2019. We also have John Manning, Projects Director of EI-H2. John Manning started his career in the 90s working in the electrical services distribution industry, carrying out projects throughout Ireland, Europe, and North Africa. For the last 12 years, John has been specializing in power generation, having worked for multinationals such as GE, Siemens, and Saudi Aramco. John held the position of European Operations Manager for Siemens Westinghouse power generation fleet based out of Spain. In 2014, John moved to the Middle East, where he spent the last 6 years with Saudi Aramco as a technical and financial consultant for their internal fleet. Okay, Tom, I'll throw it over to you. Just pop yourself off mute. Perfect.
Thanks indeed, Harry. And ladies and gentlemen, delighted to be here. Good afternoon to everybody on this session today. We're delighted to be presenting here today, and I hope to be able to give you a flavour of what EI-H2 is doing in the hydrogen space in Cork and in Ireland. Thanks to Kieran Latisse and to Harry O'Farrell for the invitation, and by extent also to Cork County Council and City Council for the Energy Cork facilitation. I'll do about 20, maybe 15 to 20 minutes on slides, and Harry will as moderator there, will field the questions whenever. And as a side, just before as I'm sharing screen, quick comment to say that interesting to see that the winds have died down a bit, the big storm. So we're back from the heady heights of yesterday and the day before, where the renewable energy penetration may have been very, very big. So quick introduction to what the content. So a little bit about why hydrogen, what's hydrogen all about, a little bit about why Ireland, and why Ireland is almost a perfect storm of application for hydrogen-based solutions, and a little bit then on the projects that we are developing and the solutions that they will offered to the Irish market. So we see, there's a lot of companies looking at hydrogen in Ireland at the moment, but we're one of the first green hydrogen companies and probably the first at utility scale. And so a brief kind of look at the hydrogen landscape in Ireland. And one of the big things is that hydrogen has a big role to play in decarbonising the hard to abate sectors, and they would include agriculture in the form of fertilizer. It would also include aspects of re-electrification. Now, the second thing really that's where hydrogen has a subsidiary but equally important role to play is in helping secure Ireland's security of supply. So we all know that Ireland is on the end of a long pipeline of perhaps 2,000 kilometres of pipeline from Russia and from North Africa with regard to gas. But it's not necessarily the gas is causing the problems at the moment. It's more so the demand and supply margins, and that's why we're seeing the amber alerts, and we probably continue to see them for a while to come. And hydrogen has a part to play here, as we'll see. One of the key things where hydrogen fits into the solution sector is that it's acting as an early alternative route to market for the offshore developers, and we'll have a look at those developers in a minute. It's actually going to play a pivotal enabler in capturing the massive wind resources that Ireland sits upon here in Ireland. And we do know that these the big names in the offshore wind development here, and we'll see some of them in a while. So you have the oil majors, and you have ESB, Equinor, Shell, Simply Blue, Ørsted, and a lot of others. So one thing they're not short of is capital, and the other thing they're not short of is appetite to deploy. But what is proving to be a stumbling block is the ability to offtake the electrons, the power that's produced, into the grid. And we'll have another look at that there in a moment. Just a couple of numbers for those of us who may not be entirely familiar with the numbers. Ireland's peak wintertime demand is about 6.5 gigawatt and growing a little every year. But the resources, the offshore wind resources that are available and economically and technically recoverable in Ireland is now seen to be more than 80 gigawatt. So if Ireland is consuming about 6.5 gigawatt maximum, it just shows there's a lot of additional capacity there to be harvested. So we see offshore wind and the role that hydrogen can play in capturing and delivering that energy. We see it as being almost the equivalent of the dairy market in the 70s in Ireland. So in the 70s, Ireland was very successful at delivering meat, beef, milk, and grass-based products and exporting them. And offshore wind and the role that hydrogen can play is the milk and meat and dairy industry of the 2020s. So by capturing it and developing it properly, we will Ireland is in a good position to help balance the national balance of payments. So we've taken a very strategic approach to our site selection in Ireland and abroad, and we'll see a little bit about that in a moment. And we have engaged Worley, who are international consultants of very strong repute. They're currently working on about 22 hydrogen projects in Europe alone. So they are our consultants in the as we move through the various projects here. So a little bit there in terms of that's some of the wind applications of Ireland at the moment. And just moving on from that, we spoke about some of the numbers. At the moment, there's about 67, as of March of this year, in any case, there were about 67 applications or considerations for offshore wind development in Ireland at the moment. And they were totaling earlier on this year about 27 gigawatt. So as we all know, government and DECC has mandated EirGrid to look at accommodating about 5 gigawatt of that capacity onto the grid. Now, if there's 27 gigawatt of considered applications at the moment, and if EirGrid are looking at accommodating 5 of those gigawatt by 2030, and perhaps the scenarios may not even be able to accommodate 5 gigawatt, there's a lot of stranded capacity there. And that's where we see the hydrogen solution as being a bridge. So allowing the appetite and capital and development capability, deployment capability of the offshore wind developers to convert their electrons into molecules, alternative route to market, and those molecules of hydrogen, as we'll see in a while, can be delivered domestically or exported. So we are helping kickstart the hydrogen economy, and by extension, helping kickstart and deliver the offshore wind industry. And to do that, we're combining local market intelligence, and there's a lot of that here in Ireland, with international expertise to create the high potential projects. A small insight into our projects here, and I have a bit more on this later in a moment, but Blue Mackerel is our first project. It's for delivery by 2024. It's a 50 megawatt grid connected project based in Hada, in a site that we acquired earlier this year. I'll speak a little bit about the grid connection aspect of it, but we really wanted to take an early presence and stake out a presence in the market at an early stage. And leveraging on from that project is our second project, Green Marlin, and we'll have more detail on this in a moment. So Green Marlin is a far bigger project, at 3.2 gigawatt of hydrogen electrolysis facility. The difference between Green Marlin in Bantry Bay, which is based on Whiddy Island, and Blue Mackerel, is that Green Marlin is entirely based on captive offshore wind. So we will be taking offshore wind from 3 or 4 suppliers off the southwest coast into the Whiddy Island facility. Now, Whiddy Island is a facility which is owned by our 50-50 partners in the venture, and this is Zenith Energy. Zenith are a American headquartered but globally based multi-fuels, multi-port fuels handling and storage company. And they own Whiddy Island, 550 acres of it, or the majority of it. And we have at our disposal about 250 acres down there, into which we will be building out the extensive the electrolysis and the ammonia synthesis, which is another aspect of our strategy. We'll have a look at that in a moment. So those first two projects, the site here is acquired, and we're in the middle of environmental impact assessments and going for planning in the middle of next year. The second project we have, the JV owns the island, and we are again heavily into the engineering stage. This is a much bigger project by extension. We're looking at up to 7 billion of capex, whereas the Hada project at 50 megawatt is at about 140 million. And the delivery of this, of course, is dependent on offshore wind and how fast offshore wind can deploy, and whether there's any additional speed of deployment by not necessarily needing foreshore licenses, and I'll show you a bit about that in a moment, and by not necessarily needing to interface with the grid. So the model that we have developed out in Green Marlin and Bantry, we are replicating that model up in 2 additional sites up on the west and northwest of the country. I just haven't, as you can probably appreciate, identified the exact location of those sites because we have not finally closed off the site acquisition on both of those projects. But both of those projects are going to be about 2 gigawatt in terms of capacity. The final project in our portfolio at the moment is in a place called Puerto Llano, which is a heavily industrialized site 200 kilometers south of Madrid. And again, we just wanted to internationalize the business a little, and we wanted to change and widen our exposure from offshore wind in Ireland into onshore, of course, PV, which is much lower cost energy. So that site is under development as well. A brief note on this, and I won't spend too long, but the various power sources for our projects are as follows. So for the grid connected project, which is the first project, we're going to utilize curtailed energy. So energy that would otherwise be dispatched down or off relating to onshore wind projects. So last year, 2019, there was about 1.1 terawatt hour of energy dispatched down. Last year, it increased up to about 2 terawatt hour. It's probably a little lower this year because the wind regime wasn't great. But curtailed energy is of no use to anybody. And there's a famous saying that the most expensive form of the most expensive form of energy is that you don't use. But the corollary also applies, and that is the most expensive form of generation is that which is not used, and that's the curtailed energy we're hoping to capture. Part two of our energy sourcing strategy is we're importing green energy fuels, and we are doing that with our partners Zenith Energy. We will be importing hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels and storing it in Bantry Island from 2025 onwards. This will be sourced from 2 locations in the world where energy is produced at much lower costs than it will be produced in Ireland. But we see this as a transition strategy to help the security of supply issues. And this fuel will be dispatched directly to industry, such as data centers and others, to help with the imbalance in terms of supply and generation forecasts. The last form of energy is the form of energy that I just spoke about with regard to the Bantry project, and that's the captive offshore wind. And that's the energy source for our further 2 projects up off the west and northwest coasts. The use cases for the green hydrogen and the green ammonia, which will be synthesized in Whiddy Island and in our other sites, the use cases are injection and blending to the gas grid. And there are some legislative developments required there from the CRU and others before this can necessarily happen. But we have a number of alternative use cases, and the actual mix will depend on how legislation develops over the next 3 years, particularly with regard to the Irish hydrogen strategy, which will be published next year. The alternative uses then are going to be for direct supply to industry, and for export as ammonia, and indeed perhaps hydrogen, but mainly as ammonia to some of the big industries in Northwest Europe, Germany and Holland, and finally re-electrification. And there's a little bit more on one of the following slides on that. Our first site, here's just a little bit on our first site. It's in Ahada, 50 megawatt site. There are a number of potential off-takers in the immediate vicinity. They comprise of generation power plant owned by ESB, generation power plant owned by Bord Gas, Ireland's only oil refinery, and there are other industrial consumers not too far away also. Of course, there are industrial zones and energy parks planned for that area of the country as well. Just a little bit more on the background as to why hydrogen might have a part to play. We're all familiar with the fact that a large part of our energy, our gaseous energy, is coming from the interconnector with the UK. This figure here is, of course, a little bit overstated. Currently, it's much closer to about 70%. But as the Cork field depletes over the next few years, and as this field is gone as well, this figure is likely to push up into the high 90s. The unfortunate thing, and I mean this with no disrespect to any of our neighbours in the UK, but Ireland has sourced its fossil fuel energy, its gas, its coal from the UK over the last 100 years. And the unfortunate thing is that though we sit on some of the best wind resources in the world and therefore have a huge capacity to generate renewable energy, by 2026, because the UK are quite a bit ahead of us in terms of green hydrogen production and blending it with their own natural gas grid, we will be importing a blend of renewable energy in the form of hydrogen from the UK by 2026. So a little bit more context, just moving over to the electrical side of things. I think we're all familiar with the Amber Alert situation. EirGrid has been quite open and transparent about that. And that situation is likely to pertain for perhaps the next 5 or 6 years until new fossil fuel plant and extended duties for Money Point and new renewable energies and new storage mechanisms come on stream. So that's about a 6-year gap between now and that situation being rectified. And the other thing is the data centers. I'm not about to jump on any podium at the moment and blame the data centers. To me, they're a necessary part of Irish industry, but they do consume a lot of load. So out of the 6.5 gigawatt of peak demand in Ireland in wintertime, at the moment, there's nearly 2,000 megawatt of that is connections to data farms, data centers, and there's actually another 2.8 gigawatt. These are huge numbers, but another 2.8 gigawatt of connection applications from data centers with EirGrid. And just lately, in the last few weeks, we've seen a determination from the CRU that these are to be offered grid connections, but that they will be non-firm. So that means that they will have to put in an equivalent generation capacity on site. And the way of doing this up to now has been to use gas or diesel, but hydrogen is a very, very, very strong, more costly, but a strong and carbon-free alternative for any of these loads. So we're just looking a little bit there at what we're going to do with the hydrogen. So if you look at the site in Cork Harbour down here, and as well as using what we're calling DOD, which is demand on our doorstep, which is local industry, we're also providing legislation allows, and it may not, but we're also hoping to pipe this into one of the local AGIs belong to GNI and blend it with natural gas. So that's the model that we're replicating around the rest of our sites in the country. So, for instance, with regard to Bantry Bay, much bigger project totaling 2.7 and 0.5, so that's 3.2 gigawatt. By the way, the balance there and the split between hydrogen for blending and green ammonia for export, and indeed for fuel bunkering for the marine industry, is not necessarily in the order there, that those balances may change. But one of the options that we're looking at, instead of getting kind of very costly, environmentally difficult to move grid connections from the grid up here, because there's no grid of any grade, note down here, instead of getting in EirGrid infrastructure from the 220 and 400 kV structures up here down to where a lot of the wind can be captured, we're instead going to bring hydrogen in a pipeline. At least we're intending to. I'm not saying that this solution is not without challenges, but we're intending to enter into a PBP to bring gas to the market to somewhere like Mitchelstown, where we will in turn blend in with the natural gas. So, you know, if you deliver these volumes of hydrogen up to the grid, you're probably talking about a blending percentage of somewhere between 4 and 8%, depending on whether you're looking at wintertime high flows or summertime low flows. And we're replicating this solution then, in addition to the Cork project and the Bantry project, we're going to replicate this possibly in the Shannon Foynes area and further up the west coast as well. And so what you'll in effect have is multi-node gas injection into the grid, and speaking to government and speaking to GNI and EirGrid, we're seeing a certain appetite for this. In fact, a big appetite, but there are challenges in the form of the legislation that currently governs this at the moment. The other aspect here is that in addition to the blending stations, which we will use to blend our 100% hydrogen in with the methane in the gas grid, we're going to put in place gas to power generation there. So that will be hydrogen fueled gas turbines running for low periods of the year, so way above, let's say, peaking plant duty, so perhaps just 50, 100, maybe 200 hours a year. So the inefficiencies of power to hydrogen and hydrogen back to electricity don't really come into play when you're providing system services to support the grid in times of generation deficit. Just a quick slide here, which shows the facilities in Whiddy Island. And these facilities, some of you may not know, but there's 1.4 million tons of oil being stored in the oil vessels down there. It's part of the 90-day strategic reserves which Zenit maintain on that island for the National Oil Reserves Authority for Ireland. So we have a lot of, as I said, about 250 of additional acres up to the other side of this island, which we'll be placing our hydrogen electrolysis facilities and ammonia facilities and storage facilities and the substation. It'll be a very large substation. I'll show you why in a moment. Again, this slide will have raised eyebrows as we delivered it to various stakeholders over the last 6 months. What we're intending to do in order to capture the wind from this part of the country is to build out and to extend out a number of multi-terminal HVDC substations, hub substations offshore. And this will make it easier for the developers that we work with to feed into these hub substations, and we will be cabling further from there. These are notionally located at the moment. The exact location is under engineering evaluation at the moment, and we will be bringing fewer cables into our facility in Bantry. Those of you in the industry will know that EirGrid have a position on this, and they have aspirations to be the asset owner and system operator for offshore energy infrastructure as well. There's a degree of greyness there that is currently under examination in that these facilities will not be connected to the grid whatsoever. So they're effectively islanded. Here we see just a number of the stakeholders that we're working with at the moment, either potential or solid. And finally, I will just speak about some of the national policy. So National Development Plan and the CRU, of course, have very strong roles to play in this. And Vision 2050, of course, which has got high aspirations for zero carbon futures by 2030 and by 2050. So with that, I'm going to close the presentation.
Super. Thanks, Tom. I think we'll keep the Q&A to the end if we can squeeze them in before we go to you, John. I didn't have a bell to ring and prompt Tom to speed up a little bit, but no, very informative, Tom. Thanks for that. John, do you want to plow ahead with yours and we'll do the Q&A at the end?
No, I think we're okay. We've gotten that presentation across now.
Okay.
Sure.
John is here for some of the deep technical answers to questions.
Okay, that's good. So look, we can jump straight to the Q&A. I suppose. Look, I'll kick it off a bit. Great to see the level of innovation and things moving. We're all working in the energy field, I suppose, for a long enough time. Some of us longer than others. And the talks of the energy transition, been talked about for a long time, and finally we can actually see it starting to take shape before our eyes. So I suppose the EU at large is placing huge emphasis on the role of green hydrogen. Tom, if I was to ask you, it appears, at least from a policy, legislative enabling framework perspective, behind the curve a bit in Ireland. What, if you had a wish list of 3 things and you could click your fingers from a policy regulatory point of view that you would like in place tomorrow, what would those be? What do those need to be in order of priority, I guess?
Okay, thanks, Harry. Well, John may have views on that, but I'll just give you 1 or 2. I could probably, there's about an hour of content there, so I'll shorten it to about a minute. So we're looking closely at what's happening from a policy and legislative enablement point of view in some of the other countries. And as people will no doubt be aware, for instance, the UK government in the last month have decided to put in place a subsidy mechanism for green hydrogen, which has certificates of green origin. So they're actually subsidizing that to the tune of $3 per kilogram, which is a huge. I mean, if hydrogen producers here in Ireland are looking at, depending on how and the capacity and the cost at which they source their energy, they're probably looking at producing anywhere between €4 and €7 per kilogram. A subsidy of $3 a kilogram in the US is huge. That kind of thing will certainly close the gap between the cost of green hydrogen and the cost of blue and grey hydrogen at the moment. Would be brilliant. French government, on the other hand, then are offering a waiver of up to €22 per megawatt hour on the use of system charges for the sourcing of green power for green hydrogen facilities. So there are two asks. And I would say over to our colleagues in the power generation business, the offshore wind, just a general speeding up on the licensing and consents, etc., for the deployment of offshore wind.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I suppose continuing on that theme, there's a question here from Paul McCormick, and I think you partially addressed this, Tom, in the presentation by making reference to a national hydrogen strategy under development. But Paul's asking, I suppose, are we hindered because we don't have a hydrogen strategy as of yet? I guess the answer is yes.
I can say a resounding yes. Britain has produced theirs. The British Gas transmission system operators, Cadence, are moving at pace in terms of blending. We're sitting here on arguably some of the best wind resources in the country. There's, if Kuwait and if Saudi Arabia in the 60s looked at what they had in the ground, and if they had, for instance, the capacity to extract 1 million barrels per day, and if they just looked at it and said, we're going to take 50,000 barrels a day because that's all we need, well, that would have been what you might have called the poverty of ambition. I hate to say it, but that poverty of ambition is extending across some of the sectors here in Ireland at the moment, and we really do need to speed up, or else we risk being an also-ran and market share will be captured by our neighbours in Britain and in Northern Europe.
Yeah, I mean, just in that context, Tom, you mentioned already, 20, close to 30 gigawatts of applications in for offshore wind development, yet our stated 2030 ambition is just what we can call a paltry 5 gigawatts. Now, take the point, obviously that's to be integrated to our own system, but with the role hydrogen can play and just the vastness of our resource, that lack of ambition, how big is that? Can it even be quantified, I suppose?
I think you've just quantified it there. In terms of the applications and for developments in March 2021, which totaled 27 gigawatt. By the way, it's a lot more since then. And what we're seeing actually from some of the offshore wind developers, again, who have the capital and they have the appetite to deploy these projects, we're seeing already that some of them, and I won't necessarily name names today if you don't mind, but some of them are moving westward from where they were considering developing off the south coast of Ireland. They're moving westward because to make it easier to offload into some of the, into let's say our Green Marlin pantry-based project. But look, at the moment, if there is 27 gigawatt and EirGrid they're shaping our electricity future consultation, which is not, I understand, is not totally finished yet. But the various scenarios in there are going to be lucky to be able to address somewhere between 2 and 4 gigawatt of that. So I think, I think the goalposts need to be looked at very, very carefully. And I think these goalposts will have to change and be revised very quickly again.
Okay, thanks for that, Tom. Question here from Seamus Collin. I don't know, maybe John, if this is addressed to you, or you can beat each other up there. What physical size will the facility be in Ahead?
At the moment, the design is based around 5 acres.
Okay.
So that's what we're assessing at the moment.
Okay.
But preliminary design is around 5 acres. And
I suppose, look, maybe continuing on that theme, the Bantry Bay project, which is a mega project, by all intents and purposes, in orders of scale from an engineering complexity point of view. Can you give us a sense of that, maybe in comparison? You are probably looking at the moment between the 3 and the 4 gigawatt of power generation. You're looking at around 71 hectares for the design power plant at the moment. So that's huge, yeah. Absolutely. A question here from Jerry O'Sullivan, which is an interesting one. If the natural gas we will be importing in the near future from the UK through the interconnector already includes hydrogen in the mix, is this going to limit or constrain the amount of hydrogen we can add here to our own grid?
The technical answer to that is yes. So how commercially, or more importantly, politically, we get over that, and how perhaps we can take a stance which will limit the amount that comes in. That's down to engineering detail and complexity, but the answer is yes, it will limit what we can put in here. Having said that, there's so much energy content in the gas transmission system in Ireland that, you know, I'm just speaking very roughly from the top of my head, but if you were to generate the equivalent of 10 gigawatt of offshore wind and turn it into hydrogen and inject that in its entirety into the gas grids, although nobody would be seeking to do that, because I think a lot of the producers, including ourselves, are looking at a large proportion of export as well. But if you were to take that entire 10 gigawatt, you're probably only going to raise the percentage dilution by about another 8%. So there's a lot of additional capacity over and above what will be coming in from the UK.
Okay, thanks for that, Tom. So one from Ross O'Connell here, just expressing his thanks for the presentation. Has there been a study yet on how many jobs could be created in the Bantry area with the Green Maryland facility? So in terms of investment, we're talking upwards of 7 billion. You know, what does that translate to in terms of jobs, construction, etc.? Do you have an answer at this stage, I suppose?
Construction side, you'd probably be looking at peaking around 1,100 people.
Okay.
So a phased approach, but you would be peaking around that. You know, in relation to auxiliaries and stuff, we haven't done a study on that, but it would be substantial.
So that's huge. I mean, in the context of jobs in Bantry, that's absolutely huge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Harry, just to add to that, there's a metric or KPI out there, which, you know, is a little bit loose, but it suggests that for every 1 gigawatt of offshore wind and hydrogen combined, that you're looking at up to 2,000 jobs. I'm in no position to substantiate that, but, you know, if you do look at everything from the construction and deployment of the offshore wind, and then the operation and construction of the electrolysis and everything else that happens from there onwards, be it export arrangements via shipping, or be it pipework construction for delivery to blending stations and re-electrification. There's a lot of jobs out there. So, you know, the 2,000 jobs per gigawatt sounds a lot to me, but I guess the real answer is not too far off that.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe just a question then, Tom. You know, you mentioned what is an interesting aspect to this actually is that whole concept of short or medium term import of green hydrogen or ammonia, as the case may be, green electrons. You know, how important a role will that play in the short to medium term, I suppose, and, you know, in the wider green hydrogen sector development? Very important in the shorter term, I guess, as other countries are ahead of us. And we're leveraging on what they're doing in a different geography to help us here, I guess.
Absolutely. And I mean, look, we're looking at locations in the world where energy is being generated at somewhere in around between 11 and 14 euro per megawatt hour from PV in the right locations. By the time that is converted into hydrogen, and by the time the hydrogen is synthesized to ammonia and shipped across the world, certainly that price goes up by an order of magnitude. So having said that, we see it as being something which bridges the gap between our first facility in Ahada is going to produce somewhere in the order of 22 tons of hydrogen per day. You know, any one or two single industries would use that easily. So until we're in a position to generate significant amounts. So what's the tonnage, John, in the Bantry project?
You would probably be looking at off memory, probably 1,400 tons.
Yeah, 1,400 tons per day. So, but we are not going to be in a position, because we can't. It's probably the offshore wind deployment that's the retarding factor, if you like, here. But we won't be in a position to manufacture and deploy that until maybe 2029, 2030. So we see there being that's a long way away in the mindset of politicians, in the mindset of DCC and the commissioner and GNI or Airgrid or anybody else. So we see there being a great opportunity, and we're close to signing off on the shipping and delivery contracts from different parts of the world. And the people who are going to look at maybe utilizing this, it's going to be a mix. Not everybody's going to want it, because there's going to be a premium to pay on green hydrogen or green ammonia, and it will not compete with blue hydrogen or with grey hydrogen or with the calorific equivalent content of natural gas today. It may start competing in 8 years' time as the technology evolves, etc., and as renewable energy PPAs become less expensive. But we see a great opportunity, and the types of business that will utilize the ammonia that we bring in are likely to be those who have high carbon emissions, but also those who have solid enough bottom line gross profit margins that they can afford to be able to. It'll be a scarce commodity for the first 6 or 8 years, and not everybody will want it. But some.
Super, thanks for that, Tom. I suppose maybe just a little bit then, one aspect really we haven't talked about is the off-takers potentially. Can you give us a sense of, what kind of interest, what kind of appetite is out there, obviously without divulging anything commercially sensitive, but, who are the types of organizations, where are they, and how important a role do they see hydrogen playing in their own decarbonisation journey?
The answer to that is that nearly everybody is expressing an appetite for it. So a lot of industries with high thermal requirements or as the need to auto-generate, to self-generate on site. We're speaking to such a wide variety of potential off-takers. We're often asked by the investors that we're in discussions with, where are your 10 and 15 and 20-year offtake agreements, which will, solidify the investment choice. We don't necessarily have them at the moment, because there's so much appetite out there that we haven't brought it down to a contractual sign-off yet. I would say the data centers are one sector which is very, very interested in this. And their concerns are really around the reliability and the deliverability of this green hydrogen to wherever they may choose to locate. So the appetite is immense, to be honest with you. But when you come to the point of needing to sign off contractual offtakes, you'll find that there's a certain amount of tire kickers in the business, and only some will necessarily want the product at the price.
Absolutely, yeah. No, listen, that's great. I don't know, anything else you want to cover off? Maybe for once we're going to finish bang on time, and if anybody else has a question, throw it in quickly. But I think we've covered off a lot of it. Great to see the development on our doorstep. The message, I think, coming loud and clear is government policy makers, legislators, regulators need to step up to the plate. I think firstly increase the ambition, and then support businesses like EI-H2, the offshore wind developers, and all of the other climate action businesses, I guess, that are out there to make Ireland, give us the best chance of succeeding and hitting our targets ultimately. So look, I'm going to wrap it up. I just want to say thanks again to our speakers, Tom Lynch and John Manning, for their insightful presentations and answers. As ever, thanks to Cork City Council and Cork County Council for their continuing support via their economic development funds. Thanks to you all for tuning in and engaging with the discussion today. If you have any feedback on this event or would like to discuss speaking at a future briefing, don't hesitate to get in touch. A recording of the event will be available on the Energy Cork website shortly, and we will be back in early 2022 with more briefings. So I suppose this is it for 2021. It's been a busy enough year for Energy Cork. Kieran, I think we've squeezed in quite a lot of briefings. We've covered some really innovative and interesting areas. So again, just to express thanks to everybody who's attended all year. And on behalf of all of Energy Cork, I'll take the opportunity to wish you all a Merry Christmas and prosperous New Year. Thanks all. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.